My name is Claire Voss. I was 31 years old and I got married on a Saturday in November at the Harwick County Clerk's office in Columbus, Ohio. The ceremony took 11 minutes. The room had fluorescent lights and a laminate counter with a long diagonal scratch across it, and I kept my eyes on that scratch while the officiant asked if anyone present wanted to say a few words. The lights hummed at a frequency that had probably stopped registering to everyone who worked there. I registered it. I had registered everything in that room since we walked in. The smell of the carpet, the small rubber plant on the windowsill, the way the scratch ran at an angle that suggested someone had dragged something across the counter without meaning to and never looked back. No one spoke. There were 2 witnesses. Priya, who worked 2 desks down from me at the engineering firm and had agreed to come when I asked her that Tuesday, and her boyfriend Dan, who had taken the morning off from his job at a tile warehouse and wore a button-down shirt he'd left half untucked. They were kind people. They signed where they were asked to sign. Dan shook Marcus's hand with both of his own. The officiant asked the question at 11:14 a.m. The room was quiet. I had been to louder DMV lines. I thought about the voicemail my mother had left 4 days earlier, at 6:52 in the evening, while Marcus and I were eating pasta at our kitchen table and not talking about anything in particular. I hadn't played it for him yet. I played it twice alone, standing in the bathroom with the door closed, and then I set my phone face down on the edge of the sink and looked at the grout between the tiles for a long time. The grout was white and clean, because I had re-grouted it the previous spring on a Saturday when Marcus was at a track meet for one of his students. I had thought, while I pressed the new grout in, about what it meant to maintain things you'd built. The officiant said, "Then let's continue." I kept my eyes on the scratch. Marcus and I had been together for 4 years before we got engaged. I was a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, focused mostly on bridge assessments and load calculations, the kind of work that required patience with things that didn't move until they did. Marcus taught high school physics in Westerville. He was the kind of person who explained things carefully and meant what he said, and I had understood within the first 6 months that those 2 qualities were rarer than I'd previously thought. He was also the kind of person who could tell when something was wrong without being told, and who had the discipline not to press before you were ready. That combination, patience without withdrawal, was not something I had experienced as a consistent trait in anyone close to me before him. We got engaged in March, a Thursday, in our apartment kitchen. No restaurant, no audience. He asked, I said yes, and we stood there for a moment, and then he made coffee and we sat at the table and talked about whether we wanted a big wedding or a small one, and I said small and he said good, same, and that was mostly that. I remember the coffee was too strong and neither of us mentioned it. I called my parents the next morning. My mother answered. "Her name is Diane." She said, "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful," in the tone she used for news that was good but not surprising, and then she called to my father and said, "Gary, Claire's engaged," and I heard him say "great" from somewhere in the background, and then she asked me when I was thinking, and I said November, 8 months out, and she said that should give everyone plenty of time. My sister Becca is 3 years younger than me. She lives in Delwood, the suburb west of Columbus where we grew up, 10 minutes from our parents' house on Clover Hill Drive. Becca has always been the kind of person things happened around. Parties, plans, attention, not because she demanded it exactly, but because she expected it, and my parents had organized their calendar around her expectations for so long that it had become the default. When Becca had a school event, the family was there. When Becca needed help moving, people showed up. When Becca turned 25, they threw her a party at Caldwell Banquet Hall with a catered buffet and a photo booth. I moved into my first apartment with a borrowed truck and 2 trips. I didn't think about this often. I thought about it sometimes. The years between college and the engagement had not been nothing. I had shown up in the ways I knew how to show up, in the quiet ways that don't have names until you start listing them and realize the list is longer than you expected. When my parents' furnace failed the winter, my father had a slow quarter at work. I transferred money without being asked and told them to pay me back when they could. They didn't, and I didn't raise it again. When their back porch railing rotted through, I drove to Delwood on a Saturday and spent 8 hours replacing it with pressure-treated lumber I'd measured and cut myself. My mother brought out lemonade twice. My father watched from the kitchen door and said it looked good. When they needed someone to sit with the house during a 2-week trip to Arizona, I took my laptop and worked remotely from their spare room and watered the plants and took in the mail and left the place exactly as I found it. I had been the one they called. I had answered. These were not dramatic contributions. I never totaled them up or presented them as a ledger. That wasn't the point. The point was that I was a person who showed up, and I had understood myself as someone my family could count on, and for a long time I believed that understanding ran both directions. I kept records by habit, receipts, documents, anything that might matter later. I had bought a gray metal lockbox at the hardware store the week I moved into the Fenner Street apartment, and I had kept it on the top shelf of the hall closet since the first day, the key on my keychain alongside the car key and the mailbox key. It had my lease in it, some tax records, a folder of things I had signed and needed to remember I'd signed. A structural engineer's instinct, maybe. You document the load-bearing elements, the things that can't be replaced. The pattern that I had been too close to see became visible slowly, over the course of that last year before the wedding. It wasn't one thing. It was the way my engagement announcement moved to the end of a family dinner conversation, so there was time to discuss Becca's new apartment. It was the way my mother would mention my November date and then pivot, in the same breath, to something Becca was planning for the fall. It was the way, when I visited in September, the kitchen calendar had Becca's events in red marker and my wedding date written in pencil, lighter than everything around it, in a corner. I noticed. I said nothing. I drove back to Columbus and told Marcus the visit was fine. He looked at me for a moment. Was it? He asked. It was fine, I said. He nodded once and let it be. The voicemail was 3 minutes and 12 seconds long. My mother had left it on a Tuesday evening, and her voice was gentle in the specific way she used when she had already made a decision and was now explaining it. There was a warmth to it that took up all the space where a question might have gone. She said that Becca's birthday fell on the same weekend as the wedding. She said that the Caldwell Banquet Hall had a limited November calendar and that Becca had found the only Saturday still open and that the deposit had already been paid. She said this part twice, the deposit, as though the money made the situation structural rather than chosen. She said she hoped I understood that she and Dad would make it up to me, that we would celebrate properly at Christmas, that it was just the timing that these things happened. She said, "You know how Becca is about her birthday." I called back the next morning. My mother answered on the second ring. "Claire," she said. "Did you get my message?" "I did," I said. "It's such a difficult situation," she said. "We've been going back and forth about it all week." I waited a moment. "You already paid the deposit," I said. The venue had such a narrow window. "Mom," I said. "It's my wedding." "Of course it is," she said. "And we will absolutely celebrate with you. We're thinking Christmas, we can do something really special, just the family." Something went still in my chest. Not anger, not grief, something closer to a door closing on its own, slowly, without force. "Christmas isn't my wedding," I said. "Claire, don't make this harder than it needs to be." "I'm not making it anything," I said. "I'm telling you what it is." A pause. Then, "Your father wants to say something." I heard the phone change hands. My father's voice was calm. My father is almost always calm in the way that has nothing to do with peace and everything to do with not wanting to be bothered. He said, "Claire, your mother has explained the situation." "She has," I said. "Becca only turns 28 once." I held the phone and said nothing. "You can have a small ceremony and we'll all celebrate together at Christmas," he said. "This doesn't have to be a production." "I wasn't planning a production," I said. "I was planning a wedding." "Well," he said, and his voice shifted into the register I recognized, the one that meant the conversation was over in his mind even if I was still speaking. "Sometimes things don't line up. That's life. You've always been practical, Claire. That's one of the things we appreciate about you." "Practical," I said. "Yes." "Dad," I said, "do you understand what you're asking me to accept?" A beat of silence. "We're not asking you to accept anything," he said. "We're letting you know about a scheduling conflict. I think a grown woman could handle that without making everyone feel guilty about it." "I haven't made anyone feel anything," I said. "You're being ungrateful," he said. "We've given you every opportunity. A little flexibility from you isn't too much to ask." The word landed and stayed there. I said, "I'll let you go." He said, "Claire." I ended the call. I filed the ceremony paperwork online that afternoon. I texted Priya and asked if she was free Saturday the 8th. I went to the dry cleaner and picked up the dress I'd left there 3 weeks earlier, still in its bag. I made a grocery list and went to the store. I cooked dinner. I told Marcus what had happened, sitting at the kitchen table, and he listened without interrupting, and when I finished he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to get married on Saturday." And he said, "Okay," and that was what we did. I did not call Delwood. I did not send a message to my mother. I packed nothing symbolic. I changed nothing publicly. I simply moved forward, one day at a time, in the direction I was already going. The officiant finished the ceremony at 11:25 a.m. Marcus signed. I signed. The scratch on the counter ran from somewhere near the edge of the form to somewhere past the center. Someone had done it a long time ago, and the laminate had yellowed faintly around it, and it occurred to me briefly that 1,000 other people had stood at this counter and not noticed it at all. I picked up the envelope, thick, cream-colored, stamped in blue ink by Harwick County, and folded it once along the middle, careful, so the stamp stayed flat. I slid it into the outside pocket of my bag, where it sat against my hip for the rest of the morning. Something settled in my sternum, not relief, not triumph, something older than either of those, something that felt like ground under my feet after a long time of walking on something softer. Priya hugged me in the parking lot and said, "I'm really glad you asked me." Dan shook Marcus's hand again. We went to a diner on Harwick Street and had eggs and coffee, and Marcus made Priya and Dan laugh with a story about a student who had attempted to prove to him that gravity was optional, and the winter light came in low and yellow through the window, and I drank my coffee and let the table be loud. I drove past Clover Hill Drive once, on my way out of Columbus that afternoon, without planning to. I didn't stop. The house looked the same as it always had, cream siding, the porch railing I'd replaced, the maple in the front yard gone yellow at the edges. I looked at it for the 3 seconds it took to pass, and then it was behind me and I kept driving. Months passed. Ordinary months. Work, weekends, dinners, a weekend in Michigan where Marcus and I walked along the lakeshore and talked about where we might want to be in 5 years and agreed on most of it. The space that had been occupied by the effort of managing my family's feelings became available for other things, and I was surprised, though I knew I shouldn't have been, by how much space that turned out to be. 8 months after the courthouse, on a Wednesday evening in July, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Claire. Been thinking about things. We should reconnect. It's about the house, some things have come up with the property. Let me know when you have a few minutes." I read it twice. I set the phone face down on the kitchen counter. I stood at the counter for a moment, not moving, the kitchen quiet around me. I went to the hall closet and brought out the gray metal lockbox I kept on the top shelf, the one I'd bought at the hardware store the week I moved into the Fenner Street apartment, for documents that mattered. I carried it to the kitchen table with both hands, the way you carry something that has some weight to it. I set it on the table and opened it. Inside, the lease for the apartment, Marcus's and mine. Our car titles. A folder with tax records going back 7 years. A smaller envelope with the deed receipt from our first joint purchase, a piece of outdoor furniture we had bought last fall and documented on principle. And the Harwick County envelope, still folded along the crease I'd made in the parking lot. I reached in. I took it out. I set it flat on the table and looked at it for a moment, the blue county stamp, the clean fold, the slight yellowing at the edge where it had sat against other papers. I opened the envelope, not slowly, not ceremonially, just the way you open something that belongs to you, and unfolded the certificate inside. 2 signatures. 2 witnesses. 1 officiant's seal. I opened my phone and pulled up the photo Marcus had taken of us standing at the counter right after. I held the certificate flat in my left hand and the phone in my right, and I looked at both of them together for a moment. My father had called me practical. He'd meant it as a compliment of the diminishing kind, practical as in manageable, as in unlikely to make trouble. What he hadn't understood was that practical, in my vocabulary, meant something different. It meant I kept records, I read documents, I didn't sign things I hadn't read, and I didn't undo things once I'd done them. I had done this. I set the certificate flat on the table, smooth, the county stamp facing up. The house on Clover Hill Drive had been appraised at $618,500 the previous spring. I knew this because my father had mentioned it, casually, at a dinner 2 years ago, in the same sentence as a remark about equity and getting older. Whatever had come up with the property, whatever $14,340 or some other figure my father had arrived at required, had nothing to do with any document in this box that wasn't already mine. I had walked out of a 37-person family wedding with 2 witnesses and a county stamp, and I had not asked anyone to feel sorry for me. I was not going to begin now. I put the certificate back in the envelope. I folded it along the same crease. I set it in the lockbox. I closed the lid. A year has passed since that Wednesday in July. I still live on Fenner Street, though Marcus and I are in the process of buying a place in Worthington, a small house with a yard and a furnace that works and a back porch that will need work eventually. I've already looked at the railing. It's the same kind of wood my father's porch had been, pressure-treated, and I know what to do with it. My father's text sat unanswered. He sent one more, 3 weeks later, shorter, Claire. Just need a few minutes. I read it. I set the phone down. I have not replied. My mother sent a Christmas card in December, addressed to both of us with a brief note inside that said she hoped we were well and that she missed me. I put it in the recycling bin the same evening, not quickly, not angrily, just put it there the way you put things where they belong. The lockbox sits on the shelf in the hall closet. Fireproof, gray, with a small key I keep on my keychain alongside the car key and the mailbox key. Some mornings I reach past it for something else and my hand brushes the edge of it, and I feel the slight weight and the cool metal and I keep moving. The certificate is inside. It isn't going anywhere. I think about what my father said, about being practical, about flexibility, about gratitude. I've turned it over enough times now that it's worn smooth. What I've come to understand is this: some people will call your boundaries a burden and your self-respect a grievance, and they'll say it warmly with your best interests in their mouth. The practical thing, as it turns out, is to believe them the first time. If any of this sounds familiar, if you've been the one who showed up and still got left out, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the right person sees it at exactly the right moment. The lockbox key is on my keychain. Every single day I carry it without thinking.